was horrified to learn that I was deeply ignorant about female physiology or my own body. It was just really upsetting that I had a PhD in human biology and I was so ignorant. I left that appointment feeling like ashamed and embarrassed and enraged and decided to go learn more about that topic. It's the single greatest accelerant of aging in women. I've never in my life felt so aligned and so on purpose. And if you had told me a year ago, I would laugh in your face.
Daisy, a Harvard-trained molecular biologist, has founded and exited her own company, is now in the next phase of kind of life, both business professionally, but also being a family woman and raising kids and living in modern day Los Angeles. But before all that, take me back to who Daisy was in the very beginning of life.
My dad is a computer engineer. My mom is sort of like a artist, entrepreneur type person. And we grew up in Silicon Valley, Bay Area, in late 80s through the 90s. And so both having parents that were sort of computer science and arts mixed together and also being in the background and context of the Bay Area really influenced a lot of how I came to be as a person. I think being someone who really values creativity and aesthetic and things like that, but really has an intellectual drive. My dad was very much always pushing us all into science. No one wanted to do it, but I really did love science. So I did do that. But no one, my sister tried and then was like, oh, get me out of here. Ended up being a lawyer. So, yeah. And then of course, growing up in the Bay Area during that time was pretty incredible because that was like the rise of the internet. And when we all started having computers and before smartphones, and seeing both in my own home and in the environment around me, a lot of people who were entrepreneurs. And as a young person, both as like a child and then as I grew to be a young adult, I always felt like I really wanted to do my own thing like that and build my own company. And at the same time, I was like, but it's really hard. And there's not like a thing that I really feel that passionately about, or like an idea that I've had that feels good enough to build something around. And so I just sort of held space for that as I got older. And then, when I turned 31 and started down kind of my own path of understanding my own body and fertility, that's when it really clicked for me and sent me down that kind of entrepreneurial journey, but certainly seeded by my early life experiences in a big way.
And talk to me more about that as, I have a daughter, you have kids, and growing up, you see your parents in a certain way, but you don't necessarily know that those influences are making those influences on you. It just is the way life is. So are these sort of kind of people coming to the house? Is it like a work ethic that you're seeing your folks tapping into? Is it being interested in so many different things or?
Yeah, I think a big part of it for me was the exposure to vastly different types of brilliance. Like I would say my dad is really brilliant. Like he's very much a workhorse. He will work morning to night to get something done. And he's an engineer brain. So he just like really likes to sort of understand how things work and figure out how things work. And usually that's applied in some computer thing that I don't understand, but I think he's brilliant at it. And then my mom, on the other hand, is like very brilliant from an artistic sense. She did fashion design for a long time. She did interior design for a long time. And she just would sort of have a whim of something she wanted to pursue with this real passion. And then she would do it with excellence. And multiple different chapters of her life as we were growing up. So when we were super young, she and my dad started a clothing line together, and she was the designer, and she designed all the fabrics, and she designed all the patterns, and she made these gorgeous dresses for girls. And then, later, like I said, she did the interior design and antiquing and had this like very cool way of bringing together like old, beautiful objects with sort of like new textures and colors and modern feel to make something feel beautiful and lived in and like comfortable, but nice. And that's something that I want around me all the time. And I can't now move to any home without her helping me design the interior because I'm like, help me, Mom. I don't have her skills. So I think for me, having those two pieces that I saw really shaped that. And also, I think certainly for my mom, and I think for my dad too, there was a passion behind it as well. Like there was a real passion and enjoyment. And that's something that has really guided me in all the choices that I've made as it relates to my career, of wanting to really enjoy my time. And if we're going to be spending this enormous amount of hours working, I want to enjoy that. And it can be hard and challenging and frustrating and sometimes tedious, but like I want the ultimate output of that to feel really meaningful to me. And so that's something that's been a very important guidepost for me. That's caused me to make some pretty significant decisions and ultimately really helped me to have a really cool life that I've really deeply loved.
Like, what would be some of those important decisions that backdrop influence you into?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest one that was like the most consequential and dramatic was when I decided to leave academia back in 2018. And I was doing a postdoc at Harvard, and I had spent actually probably like 2.5, 3 years really feeling like academia wasn't quite the right place for me. And there were a lot of environmental reasons that contributed to that, like work in an environment and relational kind of weirdness with people I worked with, that made it feel really challenging for me. And also doing a PhD is super hard and terrible generally. And so when I decided to do a postdoc, I was like, okay, I'm going to give it one more try and just like really see if this is what I want, because it's what I thought I wanted. And I was really like, surfing the top of the wave. I was at Harvard and I was doing work with this really incredible scientist, these really incredible people. And so walking away from something like that, I think for many people was really confusing. They're like, why would you ever leave? Like, where are you going to go? And isn't it a waste that you spent all these years doing your training and now you're not going to continue? And that's really not how I looked at it. But also, more importantly, I was not happy and I was not fulfilled. And I saw the lifestyle and the like ways that the people who were more senior than me spent their time and energy. And I just was like, I'm just not going to enjoy that. And to each their own. Like, some people really love that and are great at it. But I knew for me, it wasn't what I wanted. And so I left. And prior to that, I'd spent an enormous amount of time really exploring other career trajectories that made sense with my training, but also were aligned to my interests. And nothing quite grabbed me. So I really just left with like no plan, other than I, as sort of a side tangent, had been modeling for a long time. So I had a way to support myself financially while I kind of figured out what I actually wanted to do in a more meaningful way for me. And so, yeah, I think it was about 18 months from the time I left to the time I was formally employed again. And most of that time I did project-based work and consulting and just explored different things in a more like engaged way than you can when you have a full-time job. And I was very lucky. It was such an honor and a privilege to be able to do that and to have modeling support me during that time. But it led me to end up starting the company I founded. And I wouldn't have been able to come to that without having the space and time to really explore, and also without holding that uncertainty, which, I have very dear friends that were like, we were really worried about you, because we're like, what is she doing? What's she going to do? And this has been a lot of time that's passed. And there were definitely moments I was lost, but I felt like certain in my uncertainty. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know I'm on my path and will arrive.
Were you worried?
No, because I felt that if I ever really were in a jam, I could probably get a job at like Starbucks or a restaurant or somewhere to just make ends meet while I figured out what I wanted. And I spent a lot of time building a really great network of friends and colleagues that I thought in the worst case scenario, I would just do a job I didn't love, but was like good and made enough money, like a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And that seemed, like a reasonable alternative. But if I had the space and time and bandwidth and, financial ability to continue walking in the uncertainty to find the right thing, then I was going to do that.
Yeah, I think the holding the uncertainty and walking in the uncertainty is a very, if you've been in the game, so to speak, like, that's really what it is. It never goes away. You just get better at carrying it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a very, not as, at least in the circles that I'm in or the things that I've listened to, it's not talked about, I feel like, as much because it's scary and it's just a lot to carry.
Yeah.
And so there's one side where, you've come from a very structured, one of the nice things about a trajectory like that is like, I get to this milestone, I get to this milestone, I get to this milestone.
Super
and then
linear.
It's super linear. And like that structure is attractive on one sense, but then when you actually get into that track and you kind of realize like, there's a lot of other second order negative consequence things. And I'm kind of seeing at the end of the path here, where these other people are like, I don't think that's where I want to go. Mm-hmm. And then frankly, like having the courage to take a pause and move into that and say like, I'm going to walk in this uncertainty and figure that next piece out. I'm not sure everybody would do that.
I think a lot of people won't do that. And I think part of it is being willing to go backwards, even if that's not your intention. And I was willing to do that. I know I can work hard. I know I can kind of hustle and get to a place I want to go. And that was a risk I felt confident in.
What do you think the Venn diagram overlap of model and molecular biological, I can't even say it.
Molecular biology.
The overlap of molecular biologist and fitness model are?
I have thought about that many times actually. You mean like in terms of traits and skills?
Yeah, expound on that, because it's obviously, it feels like sort of a juxtaposition of like, or just two very different worlds, but I'm sure as your identity and your lifestyle, you identify as both of those things and they are who you are.
Right.
How do you kind of explain that and talk about that?
So before I answer your question, I'll just tell you a very, very brief story. When I was in my postdoc, the New York Times put out this like questionnaire survey. You know how they have those interactive things sometimes? They put out this interactive whatever that was like, what's your opposite profession? And I saw that and I was like, well, that's hilarious because I feel like I know what mine is. So I went in and I think I just wrote molecular biologist and it came back and it said something about a model. I don't know if it was specific or if it just said model. And I was like, this is so classic. Yeah, I mean, I have experienced like a very specific type of modeling, right? And there's lots of different kinds. I was a lifestyle and fitness model, which means I was in a lot of like catalogs and a lot of campaigns for brands. That would be considered lifestyle. So I guess that's to say like not fashion. Mm-hmm. That's a very different culture and experience that I don't relate to. But within my experience in my lane, the way that I thought about modeling was, I'm hired to be a canvas for somebody else to showcase their product in the best way possible. And like in the way that I'm sort of like holding myself and standing and behaving, trying to like really elevate whatever that product is, almost always clothes, sometimes hair products or skincare, or whatever, water bottles or shoes or whatever. And so, there's a lot that goes into it there can be a lot that goes into it that is intellectual because you're really analyzing, like we're in a set right now. I know the light sources. I understand where the cameras are because I've been on video thousands of times. Like I know what those angles look like, what that light looks like. And so, I chose this outfit. If I was wearing a different outfit, I would maybe like move a little bit differently based on how I understood it to move. And so there's this sort of analysis that I would apply, at least in my modeling practice, into like, what does this person want out of this campaign? And then how can I deliver that based on like, what am I wearing and like, what's the setup? And then it's also physical, right? A lot of the stuff I did, probably more than half, was like overtly fitness. And even if it wasn't fitness, it's like you're holding a pose, right? And science is actually, or at least the type of science that I did, was quite physical because you're doing physical experiments all day. You're on your feet all the time, or you're like sitting and doing these little things. There's like 100 little teeny tiny circles and you're putting this liquid in these like minuscule amounts, but you have to get it in the exact same amount in all 100 of them. You're going to fuck up your results. Or like create variability and make your data less significant or whatever. And so there is this real intense focus and physicality and endurance that goes into that. And I don't know, I think there's also, this is a little bit tangential, but in science, I've always felt, and a lot of people don't agree, I've always felt that communication is an extraordinarily important part of the work that we do. To communicate our work to our peers, to our mentors, to the broader people in our field, to the public, because taxpayers fund most research. And so there's also this element of like storytelling that's both, what are the concepts of the story? What are the questions you're asking in your research? And also like, what are the aesthetic elements that pair with that help to underscore what you're trying to convey? And so that, generally comes out in a PowerPoint or in a publication. And so I always thought it was kind of funny because, modeling is marketing, it's storytelling, or it's a piece of the marketing puzzle. And science can be that way too, in a very different way. And I think the vast majority of scientists don't spend a lot of time training in communication. And I think it's to the detriment of science as a whole. And I think it's also led to this kind of broader moment that we're in with regard to misinformation and the lack of trust in the scientific infrastructure of our country in particular, because scientists aren't really engaging with the public about the work that they do in a way that's tangible and approachable. So anyways, it's a little bit of a side conversation, but when it comes back to like, where's the intersection there are a lot of pieces that connect for me with regard to the sort of analytical nature, the physical approach, the focus and endurance, the thinking about like who's the audience of what it is that I'm doing. And audience is the wrong word for science really, but what's the outcome that I'm going for? And then backtracking to like, how do I develop that? And maybe the last thing that I'd say is thinking about the different ways that we can look at something. And in science, it's, I think, essential that, you have your point of view about your work. You need to be able to put that aside and look at it from other points of view to kind of kick the tires and understand the gaps and limitations of the work. And I think in modeling, it's like a physical translation of that, of understanding like, where am I in time and space? And then like, how does that look in these different places? And how can I use space to explore and like really create something that's going to be visually compelling? And I think it's true in any profession, right? Like ultimately being able to communicate clearly and effectively and in a compelling way is going to move you forward in whatever you're doing, whether it's science or dance or modeling or being a librarian or operating massive systems of transportation. It's just an important skill to have, and to be able to navigate that in different spaces with different people who you're trying to connect with, I think is a skill. And I think for me, it's a really fun thing to think about and to work on. So it is something that I've spent a lot of time like playing with and trying to get better at.
So from academia, taking and modeling, and then taking some time to kind of figure out what that next step is, how did you sort of steer into what that next choice was going to be? And then was it apparent? Was it a pull? Was it a surprise? And then walk me through kind of what that next kind of founding story was.
Yeah. I would say it was a few turns of serendipity, really. That was sort of that quote that's like preparedness meets opportunity, sort of those things coming together and converging in time and space. I mentioned before I was 31 or thereabouts when I left my postdoc. At the same time, I also got out of a 6-year relationship with a partner. And so I was newly single and I was like, well, I know I want kids, but it's like, I'm single. So I have to date and then I have to find someone and I have to date that person for a while. And then then we'll have kids later. And, so in my mind, I'm like, okay, 35-ish is like when I might start trying to have a family. And I know just from like being in science and seeing also my older sister have some struggles with fertility, that was something that I needed to be thoughtful about in advance. And so I went to see a reproductive endocrinologist to just like understand where I was with my hormone levels and if there was anything worrisome that would suggest I maybe should freeze eggs or something like that. So I went to this appointment and was horrified to learn that I was deeply ignorant about female physiology, or like women's bodies or my own body. I knew very little. I didn't know basic things about just like the menstrual cycle. I didn't know really anything about hormones. I knew menopause was a thing. I knew it was when your periods end. I knew there were hot flashes, but I didn't really understand basically anything else about that. And it was just really upsetting that I had a PhD in human biology and I was so ignorant. And so I left that appointment feeling like ashamed and embarrassed and enraged and decided to go learn more about that topic so I could be less ignorant. And so what happened from there was I went on this deep dive to self-edify. And this was in the midst of my 18-month, I call it fun employment, where I was unemployed doing fun projects. And again, through a turn of serendipity, I ended up having a coffee with a friend of mine who's another entrepreneur, James Pyer. He had started a biotech company called Cambrian Bio. That's a longevity-focused biotech. And we both lived in New York at the time. I had just moved there. I was sort of trying to make friends and explore opportunities. And so that's why we were meeting for coffee. And he told me all about his new startup. And how it's all focused on preventing or reversing age-related decline. And I said, well, James, you've got to look at the ovaries. Nobody's looking at this. I've been to so many events dedicated to aging and longevity, so many salon dinners and panels, and I've never heard anybody not once bring up the ovaries. And yet it's the single greatest accelerant of aging in women. And it's just kind of shocking, and it's such low-hanging fruit also because of the vast history of, neglect is probably the most appropriate word in terms of understanding women and female physiology just from a biomedical standpoint. And so he ended up recruiting me to join that company. And in all honesty, when I joined, it was as a scientist in residence to sort of explore this idea and see if there was a company that we could create around this thesis that can we improve or extend the ovaries, the function of the ovaries, for the purpose of improving health span in women. Health span meaning the years of life spent in good health. When I joined, I genuinely didn't think it would result in a company. I was like, this is a cool opportunity to continue learning something I want to know about. And the upside's really great because maybe a company gets started. But the more likely scenario is I spend a year doing this, and then I'm like, that was cool. Thanks for the gig. And now I'm going to keep continuing on my journey to figure out what I'm doing, or, maybe embed into the company and do that. And so it was really, in some ways, just the greatest surprise that I ended up meeting my co-founders, Pat Donahue and David Pepin, who are scientists at Massachusetts General Hospital at Harvard Medical School. They were working on this really cool science focused on a protein called AMH, which many people know because it's used as a biomarker. It's sort of like related to your fertility and how many eggs that a woman has at any given point in time. And they were trying to understand the function of this and how it related to ovarian aging and other aspects of ovarian biology. And so I ended up learning about that through this scientist in residence position, approaching them, asking them if they wanted to build a company together. They said yes. We licensed it. I ended up getting $11.5 million from Cambrian to put together the seed funding to build the company. And we were off to the races. And I remember negotiating the CEO role with James. He was like, we don't really, like, the path of the scientist in residence isn't really to become the CEO, because it's really like you're a scientist. And you're a bit unique, Daisy, because at that time I'd already obviously been modeling forever, but I'd done a lot of public speaking about aging and longevity and been on a number of stages talking about that to broad public audiences, and had like a very small level of thought leadership cultivated around that. And so I was in a really good position to be a public-facing person representing this idea and, being able to generate the relationships necessary to build something crazy and impossible like this. So it was really cool to advocate for that and get that role, and then build this company with my team. And I don't know, what else can I say? I just remember thinking when I was, in that first year of Oviva, and thinking, how did this happen? Like being shocked and delighted that, like, wow, I've never in my life felt so aligned and so on purpose and so excited to be doing what I'm doing. And if you had told me a year ago, this is where I'd be, I would laugh in your face and be like, that sounds completely ludicrous. There was no part of me that had planned it like this. And I think that is important to underscore, because I don't know, it might be a personality thing. Like, I didn't want to articulate what my vision of my future was because it felt limiting to me. I think it would have been limiting to me. My approach after leaving my postdoc was like, I'm going to leave open space. I'm going to be curious. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to make connections, and I'm going to follow the things that are pulling me. And that's what led me to build what I built. And then I had to build a plan and execute it, of course. But like, when I was in that uncertainty space, for me, it was really important that I didn't put boundaries on it, because I never would have dreamed up what I built ever.
And that was, how long did you have that company?
We started working on it in 2020. We founded it formally in 2021 spring, and then we sold it a year ago, 2025 April-ish.
So 4 or 5 years running that company?
Yeah.
CEO the whole time?
Mm-hmm.
Good, bad experience being CEO, or a merger of both?
I mean, I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I was in a unique position because I was sort of my company was housed as a subsidiary under Cambrian, so there was a lot of the back office type of stuff that I didn't really have to do that I don't think I would really enjoy. So I had a load lifted from my shoulders that's different from a lot of other CEOs. But I really loved, the big thinking, the strategic planning, the different relationships that had to be cultivated and managing those, the board communications, the decision making. I really enjoyed all of that. And the storytelling, I think, first and foremost, of really being able to paint a picture, not just to the people that I needed to get money and support from, but to the broader public of like what actually is possible if we really think about what we as female people might want for ourselves in terms of our health and well-being. And I think 5-ish years ago, women weren't really thinking about menopause as something that you could have a lot of control over. It just happened to you and you could decide whether or not to take hormone therapy. But the concept that you could either like really eradicate a lot of the symptoms or even potentially shift the time at which you might go into menopause wasn't really something that was on the table or part of the conversation. And so it was really cool to be able to be one of the people really putting that idea out there and I don't know, getting more women engaged in their health and like what might be possible for them.
What's it like to found a company, be obviously extremely passionate about it, have this amazing sort of story of wading into the uncertainty, the universe kicking you what would be your company, getting involved for 4 or 5 years, extremely engaging intellectual work, extremely mission driven, working with a bunch of people that's probably really fun to work with, and then selling that company and kind of the backside of now that is like poof gone.
Mhm.
What's that like just as like somebody has, my own company too, like it's so much a part of your identity and the things that you do and all that stuff. Like, what was that like? And are you still dealing with that a year later?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I think of it in kind of two parts. The first is kind of the more tangible things, and the second is the identity piece you mentioned. I'll start with the first one. For me, building Oviva and getting it to where it was so amazing for many reasons. And when we sold it, there were a lot of roadblocks that we were trying to get around, get over, get under, get through that, ended up with us selling it in part because I felt the people who bought our company would be able to barge through some of those in a way that we couldn't as a very small company. So a larger company that had a portfolio of assets bought ours. And so for me, like this is a very unique circumstance because they're carrying forward that program as something that's really important to them in their priorities. So I feel confident that the work that we've done is going to move forward and like hopefully work and see patients one day. And if it doesn't, it's not going to be for lack of passion and effort and a great team and good resources, which is obviously different if it gets bought and shelved or just goes bankrupt or whatever. So from that standpoint, I'm really happy and proud. From the identity piece, it's weird because there is this sort of synonymous thing that happens, at least for me, because I decided early that I wanted Oviva to be a company that had a lot of public attention and was very driven by, the idea and the story that I wanted to share as like paving the way to build the market that we wanted to serve. And so without having that, it has been weird, especially because the role that I'm in now is in a company that's in deep stealth. So I can't talk about it at all, basically. And so when I talk to people about my work, it's weird to be like, well, I founded this company that I sold a year ago. And I can still do that, but it's not like what I'm doing. So there's this kind of like weird, disjointed feeling that I have as it relates to that. But I'll also say, when we sold the company, I was a couple months postpartum from having twins. So I also was just like completely obliterated by my personal life in a way that I didn't have any time or space to like care or put any like thought or energy into what does this mean for me? It was just like, okay, someone else is taking this forward. That's great. I'm going to try to continue surviving and being a human person because I don't really feel like a human person right now. So, as I come out of that time, Now my twin boys are 20 months old, and I feel like I'm like just becoming human again. Maybe some of those questions will bubble up again, but I don't know. I think kind of on theme with what I said earlier, a lot of the choices that I've made, I've done my best to feel like, is this aligned with what I care about and my values? And therefore, it just like there's a comfort that I can have, even if there's some dis-ease. It's like I know this is the right way. I have this confidence in like where it's going or where I'm going that keeps me from, getting in some sort of spiral or feeling weird.
Yeah, I mean, just to sell a company, one to found a company is gnarly. Then to run a company, gnarly. Do it in a public setting, exciting, but also lots of pressure. Then you had your one daughter, then you had twins, and then to be selling a company while simultaneously having you're pregnant for probably most of the time.
Zooms from the hospital the day after I gave birth.
You had Zooms from the hospital the day after you gave birth.
It was like questionable. I felt fine.
Do you think that like just level of pedal to the metal intensity is just a part of who you are? Or was that just a very concentrated time of all those things happening at once? And did that unlock a new level in you? Or was it just like, this is just too gnarly, get me some space?
Yeah, kind of all of the above. I do think that I seek out intensity. That's something I've reflected a lot on because I've had many periods where I just feel like really overwhelmed and anxious throughout my life in like a way that I think is unwell. I would categorize it as unwell, certainly in the last 2 years, just like so deeply overwhelmed. And I don't think that's good. But I do seem to make choices over the course of my life that put me in situations that create overwhelm, usually having to do with my profession or like sometimes my personal life. Like before I was partnered and had kids, I traveled all over the place and obviously was modeling and really enjoyed being sort of like out in the world and doing all these crazy things and not just having sort of like grounding and stability. So yeah, I think I am intense in many ways. And I would say that degree of intensity that the last few years has been, there's a big part of me that in the last year has really created some pretty aggressive boundaries around what I need so that I can like recover from that. Mostly physically and like emotionally and mentally and spiritually with regard to having so many kids in such short order and just, living in a culture and an environment that is not particularly supportive of young families and certainly not young families where both parents are entrepreneurs. And so it's been really important to me to really have practices that keep me like, okay. And yeah, the other thing that I would say is there is sort of an unlock, I think, when things are so gnarly. And, it's all relative, right? Like me having twins and selling a company, like all of these are positive things. Other people have like real gnarly shit happening that is overwhelming in like more traumatic ways and come through it with this like very cool demeanor. And so for me, with that history of intensity, there's this kind of relaxed state that I find myself in because very few things can ruffle my feathers because there's so much other overwhelm that I'm like, well, I can't care about that. I don't have room to care about that. It just doesn't matter. And so there is this sort of separation of like what actually matters and what doesn't matter. And what matters first is that I'm okay. And second is my family's okay. I have to be okay first so I can take care of them.
Yeah.
Your own oxygen mask. And, the people that I love are okay. And then my work and my business. And, that's a choice. Not everyone makes that same choice of how to order that. But that's something that I developed over time also from my PhD onward when I was too overwhelmed. And I said, okay, I need to get back to like, what's the most important thing to take care of? First, it's me. And yeah, I'd say with the increasing intensity, it just reinforces that hierarchy for me.
Yeah, it's like the undulation, It's like high highs, you need to have like low lows in the sense of like a recovery, or if you go hard in the paint on this, you have to go hard in the paint on recovery. And if you don't, you redline it for so long, that's when you run into the brick wall.
Can't do it. Exactly.
How do you get results? You sustain the game over the long term.
Yeah.
When you look back at your time in the company, what did you get wrong?
Man, I'm sure lots of things. I was so naive when I started it. Very naive. And I also think, like many women, I didn't value myself enough either, and like really assert my needs up front with establishing my role and like my comp and the sort of respect dynamics and control dynamics that are important to have as the founder and CEO of a company. What other things did I get wrong? I mean, I made some bad decisions, but it was by accident. So I think being able to look at those and understand what went wrong was a really important thing. But they were innocent mistakes. So it's harder to say, like, was it wrong? I was just naive. I think a lot of the mistakes were just me being naive, and not knowing enough and not realizing. And I think this is true for anyone, anywhere. You don't really know what you don't know. And I was short-sighted sometimes just because I didn't know to think far ahead. So for example, when I went out to start raising our Series A, I had a number of people, some of them who were sort of like friends that I did early pitches to for practice. Some of them were the first set of investors that I spoke to that were like, okay, well, you have this preclinical asset where it's before the clinic, we're getting ready to go first in humans. What's it going to look like when you're commercializing, which is like 5 to 7 years down the road. And for me, I'm like, I'm just focused on tomorrow. Like, I can't even do that. And so I would always do like the politician answer and be like, well, these are the priorities right now. And so like, we have sort of like a vague sketch of this, but really we're focused on these risks that are coming in the next 2 to 4 years. And I didn't really take it seriously enough, to take those points of feedback seriously enough to say, okay, I actually need to pause and really look at that and understand that better, because that's really informing the risk along the way. And certainly for investors who are looking to give us, $10 to $15 million, they need those things to be addressed. So I really should have done that. That was a big mistake that I made then. And I think now, as I'm doing work still in women's health, I really think top to bottom along the whole value chain of like, okay, what does this discovery look like? And what does it take to get it to this stage and this stage and this stage and this stage? And then once it has positive clinical data and it shows significance to change this disease and make people better, there's still like 100 pitfalls on the other side of that as it relates to launch and commercialization and marketing. And how do doctors create a diagnosis, and what causes them to write this prescription versus that prescription, and who even are the doctors, and how do patients access them, and is it reimbursed by insurance, and why or why not? And so there's all these other questions that, for me, when I was doing Oviva, I just didn't really pay a lot of attention to, because because I was focused on learning on this very steep learning curve of
the fire is so hot with like what you're doing.
I didn't really have the capacity.
You don't have the capacity nor time. It's like, dude, if we don't get through the next 2 months, but obviously you can't tell an investor that who's thinking like, I'm gonna give you money, we want to have an exit.
Yeah.
So you're kind of balancing that reality of like survival, getting through these next milestones that they might not even know about, yet still having to pitch the future in such a way that shows, one, you're thinking about all those things, which is probably true. But then on the other side, there's like analysis paralysis, where if we're thinking about that, it might freak us out to the point where we can never get past this. Yeah.
And I do think I should have shifted more, like a fraction more focus to answering, at least understanding what some of those questions were. But I will say it's sort of a pendulum swing, because now often if I'm speaking about Oviva or like ovarian longevity and the company and whatever, and at some sort of like women's health venue or future of human health venue, it is a thing that I bring up, that a lot of these early stage startups in biotech specifically are in like wellness or whatever, in a regulated pathway. If they're not thinking about those things, there's no way they can make it there. There's just no way. Also just looking at the statistics of how companies receive funding and when and why. It's just, that's a thing that you need to to be aware of and map out and then bring all the way back to day one of development and have a plan for, whether that's like you're going to get bought because that company can bear that risk better than you can, or some other strategy you're going to expand, whatever. So that's, I feel like that was one of the greatest learnings, was to be a lot more forward thinking. It's like I had a specific type of forward thinking, but it didn't capture all this context for the practical logistics and operations of like, how would someone eventually access, pay for, use a thing that I'm trying to develop.
And now when you actually practically go about executing on something like that, is this journaling exercise? Is this talking to different people and like artifacts being made on these things, pitches, convos, all of the above? How does one now go from taking that lesson, getting punched in the face in a way, and then actually now carrying that and improving in those future decisions?
Yeah, I'd say, people make careers out of each one of those questions that I highlighted, right? That's their whole career. And so I don't think I'm going to learn everything I need to know, but I want to learn enough to be dangerous and to know I have XYZ people to go to advise me. And so that's been my approach over the last year, is going into the rooms and settings and venues where I can sort of soak up more and just understand the infrastructure of how this works. And also, who are the players, who are the decision makers, where's their leverage, where's their not leverage, like what actually needs to happen for there to be change, and who can I talk to show me my blind spots and to help me create a strategic plan that relates to those things. So that's really been how I thought about it, which is, attending events and conferences relating to policy or reimbursement or, commercialization, which is not something I would have thought I would have ever done. And I think on paper, to me, sounds super dull. But again, because of how it's connected to what I really want to see from an impact standpoint, I'm like voraciously intaking this information. So it's very enjoyable from that regard.
And then how has being mom changed you as a business person?
There's a part of it where you really just have to get clear on your values and priorities, for me at least. And kind of what I said earlier, like there's certain things that I just like can't be bothered by, that I just think they're not important enough to put attention into, because I have now like time is my most limited resource. And so, it's being more efficient with how I work, but it's also really doing sort of like the kill questions more quickly of like, how important is this thing to actually think about? Is it going to move the needle in any kind of way? And if not, like, it's not important. We can't care about it. It can be a bullet item that like maybe some other person looks at later, but I'm not going to look at it. So getting clearer more quickly about what really matters and what will guide a decision is something that's been important. I think also in a very, very different way, over the last 8 years or however long it's been since I started, working in industry more, I've had a number of conflict-oriented conversations or relationships that have come up for various reasons. And I think another piece that has helped in being a mother is remembering that everybody is somebody's baby, and we all grow up, surrounded by whatever our environment is, and that really informs how people move through the world. And I genuinely think, for the most part, people aren't trying to be assholes. They're in their story of what they're doing, they think they're correct and acting right. So I think that's been something that's helped to just stay like calm and be able to receive someone, even if they're being rude or whatever. And that's not to say that I will tolerate behavior that's inappropriate, but it's to have compassion, regardless of what's going on. And I think that's important both in business and, of course, just like in this very bizarre time that we live in. So I think that's important. And I think then, of course, is the negotiation ninja skills that you get being a parent, and the real creativity that I have learned in negotiating, certainly with my 4-year-old and now starting with my boys, and just like how to maneuver the things you're doing and saying at all times to like push things forward on the course that you want.
Do you see that manifesting and making its way into your like professional career?
100%. I mean, it's like, it's negotiation, right? It's like, it just is. And you can practice on your children.
That's so good.
And then, and then it translates. So for sure. Yeah.
And then in home life and personal life, your life partner is also in sort of an entrepreneurial, has his own company thing, which on one hand sounds really cool, but on the other hand, just as somebody that's in it and knows how hard these things can be when you have two people doing those things plus a family, like my guess is that can get pretty difficult and gnarly, yet there's this third entity that you guys have to tend to of this partnership to make you both okay, but your kid's okay and strengthen all of that. Is that something you guys struggle with, actively work on? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, definitely. Even before we had kids, there was this way that we would talk about ourselves and our relationship as like these spheres. And there's like the daisy sphere and there's the atom sphere and there's the sphere that sort of contains the relationship that we have with one another. And that was in part informed by the fact that both of us, we met later in life. I was 34 or something. He was 41, thereabouts. I don't remember exactly, but later-ish to be meeting the person who becomes your life partner. And so we both really established our own independent lives and we both really valued that. And for us, the style of relationship we wanted was being together a lot, but also having our own time and spending time with our own friends and doing things that wasn't always together all the time. And that's very important for us to have space for that. And so from the beginning of our relationship, we set a foundation of that where we would take actions to protect and honor the other person's just alone time and like being able to cultivate that self outside of the relationship. And when we became parents, the first year after my daughter was born was pretty rough in like all regards, certainly on the relationship. We just like took a while to adapt to that and how to parent together, which is so different from just being in a relationship with someone or cohabitating with someone. And we have this fabulous couples therapist who we love, who we started seeing then and have seen like with some regularity over the last several years, who gave us a lot of good tools that helped to smooth that out and like give us the skills we needed to navigate complexity and tension. But now that we have such a big family, or it feels big, 3 kids and then us and then our respective careers that are both entrepreneurial in nature, it is like these different, it's like there's me, there's Adam, there's the family, there's our relationship, there's his business, there's my business. And then there's sort of this holistic thing of like, what is this life we're creating and living together? And I would say we've worked really hard with intentionality to try our best to both support and protect the dreams of each of us as parents, separate from the family. And, part of my dream as a person was to have a family with 3 children. That was not Adam's dream. He was like interested in children, but probably more one. Like he was like, I don't know, more than one seems like, why would you do that? Because he's a single child and very happy being an only child. But yeah, so there was this element when we found out we were having twins where I was like, oh no, like Adam's not going to do well with this. And I will say he's been doing really well. And it's been in part because I recognize for him, like he needs to have the space and time that he can still follow his passion. And I think if either of us felt like that was overly compromised, it would really cause us to suffer as an individual and cause our relationship to suffer and cause our family dynamic to suffer, which I think is why, or at least is how I rationalize really like doing as much as I can to give him that space. And he does so for me as well. And we have plenty of friends that have kids and we see all kinds of different ways that people operate as it relates to this thing. And most of them like somewhat different from that. And I think it's very much to each their own what everybody needs, but I know he needs that. I know I need that. And we work hard to give that to each other. And that means there's times like this week, he's in an immersion with a client. So he's working with them most of the day. And then at the end of that, he has to get ready for the next day. And then he's going to be done Saturday night. And like technically he's not working Sunday, but I know he's not really available Sunday. Like he's going to be like crashing from the intensity of the last 4 days or whatever. And so, I prepared to have, a little bit of support from babysitters, whatever, while he's gone. Have someone coming for a couple hours Sunday. I know that I'm just like on as mom full time, except when the kids are in school. And like, that's just part of it. And then next week I'm going to DC and he's going to hold it down. And then he's going to Atlanta and then I'm going to San Francisco. It's like we're doing stuff and we just kind of take turns and sometimes we get burnt out and we say that and it's okay. And I've told him many times now, but I told him, I think after we had Scarlett, my oldest, that I think of how we operate in parenthood as like we're in a Tough Mudder race together or like a Spartan race. There's like competitive races where you're in a team. It's like you're crawling in the mud under the barbed wire and you're doing it together. Like the important thing is you're doing it together. And like, no, I don't want to crawl under barbed wire in the mud, but like, it's nice that I'm doing it with you. And so whenever we have like moments of tension that come up, that's a thing that we come back to of like, you need to do this together. And like, how can we make it so that it feels that way? And we don't always do it well, but that's our aspiration. And I think a lot of the time we do it well.
Nice. What do you feel like of a lot of the stuff that we've talked about so far? Like, what do you feel like you're still figuring out?
Oh, I mean, lots of it. I don't understand how people are expected to balance work and personal life with small kids. I think that's just like, it blows me out of the water every day. Something is always suffering. Always, every day. There's a part where you're like not even close to what you would think is an acceptable level of showing up. So that's something that I really struggle with actively, like just ad nauseum forever. And I assume will change, when my kids are grown or something, hopefully. But that I don't understand. And I'm working on that. And then, that bleeds into the next thing I'd say, which is in work. I'm still trying to figure out like, how do I want to show up as an executive and as a leader? And how can I bring my whole self into that is something that feels important. That when I started Oviva, I felt like I'd really integrated all of these various components of myself really well, that I'd formally compartmentalized, that the modeling was over here and the scientist was over here and the athlete was over here. And they would dabble a little bit together, but they were mostly separate. And then when I had Oviva, I felt like I really brought it all together and I was really integrated. And now it feels disjointed again because it's like, it's so intense. Like motherhood is so intense right now. I'm still like actively recovering from giving birth and being pregnant with the twins, even though it's almost 2 years later. And like fun fact for everyone, your people who give birth, like they're still physiologically shifted more than 2 years after giving birth. That's like, there's data that support that. It's pretty wild. And we are kind of expected to just go back to work and like function business as usual, despite having this enormous additional load of caretaking. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to show up integrated and like feel okay about that, because I feel similar to the point before, like I'm just not hitting it at the right level across the board. I'm like far below everywhere I want to be everywhere. So, that's like the sub of that, of how do I show up at work in this context, like understanding that there's limitations that aren't really, I wouldn't say they're out of my control, because I could just leave my family theoretically, but I'm not going to do that. So like, given that I want to be a committed mom and showing up for my kids and my partner, how can I also show up for work in a way that feels really good? And it's just so rare that I feel really good about how I show up. So that's a bummer. And I don't know, figuring out, I think just setting a new lifestyle in this moment also. There's so many balls in the air. So getting clear on what's most important and how to, put my time and energy according to what's most important, because there's too many things that feel very important, but something has to give.
And then what would you say kind of in closing here, like, what would you say draws you to be around people and environments that take things seriously, or that like have a perspective on the world, or look at things from the, maybe at one point are compartmentalized, but now are becoming this unique, special thing? Back to like thinking about, you wanting your mom to help build out your house and be your interior designer and all the different components that go into that. Like, why do you think you're attracted to that?
Oh, um, I think I'm just a curious person, and I really enjoy a thing that I've always enjoyed and that I think has informed lots of the ways that I've chosen to learn and do work and be a professional of a certain kind is just wanting to know, like, how do we all get to be how we are as people? Um, I almost majored in psychology, I think, for the same reason. We all show up here with our own stories and behave in certain ways that are sort of learned or reactions to other things. And I just think that's really fascinating. I think we all are just a product of our environments and genes, obviously, but a big product of our environments, our culture, and our families. And I think it's really fun to just like put on different lenses and try to see the world in this like really layered, diverse way. It's partly why I love reading novels and memoirs and like really trying to understand other points of view. I just think it's interesting. I don't know.
Crushed it.